Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this installment, Michael Caine voices a wish-granting sand creature in the children's adventure 4 Kids and It.
David, played by Matthew Goode, takes his children Teddy, Rose, Madison, Allen's Roz, and Billy Jenkins Robbie to Cornwall to spend a holiday with his new partner Alice, played by Paula Patton, and her children Ashley Alfderhyde Smash and Ellie Mae Siamese Maddie. The kids don't get along with each other, but they discover on a beach a Samiad, voiced by Michael Caine, a magical creature that can grant one wish a day that lasts until sunset. The kids soon find their wishes very quickly go wrong, and their antics attract the attention of Tristan Trent, played by Russell Brand, who searches for the Samiad in his nearby mansion.
4 Kids and It is based on the Jacqueline Wilson book of the same name from 2012, which is a modernisation / sort of sequel to 5 Children and It, the 1902 book by Edith Nesbit. That original story pops up as a book in the narrative, but it's also acknowledged that actually happened in the timeline, so this is a weird continuation of sorts. Some might actually recall that 5 Children and It was itself adapted a film back in 2004. It starred Freddie Highmore, Kenneth Branagh, and Eddie Izzard as the voice of the Samiad. I actually watched that film for this review, and I do think it has some charm to it. I think it does still work at entertaining young children, although do bear in mind that the special effects really don't hold up. In fact, I would say that they were quite bad even for the time it was made. Nevertheless, there is an enduring appeal to this story. It turns out that kids stumbling across a magical creature that can grant them wishes has a universal appeal, and as such, 5 Children and It is one of the rare books that has never gone out of print. This film was made for Sky, the digital satellite service in the UK, who are going to release it via their usual method of giving it a theatrical run while simultaneously putting it on their Sky Cinema platform at the same time. But when COVID-19 happened, they just scratched the cinema run and put it on Sky Cinema a week early, taking advantage of the fact they had virtually no competition over Easter, which was a very canny move. This is one of the rare film adaptations of Jacqueline Wilson's work. She's a hugely popular writer in the UK, but she's more commonly adapted for television. Alas, I don't think this does very much justice to her work. She does have a cameo in this film. She pops up during the closing credits in a very small scene, but otherwise, this really does a disservice to both the source material and the source material that was based on at the same time. Virtually every problem in this movie can be directly attributed to the poor quality of the script by Simon Lewis. Essentially what he's done is taken a few key set pieces from the source material and otherwise jettisoned it, and what he's come up with in its place is substantially weaker. I knew we were going to be in very rough territory right from the opening credits, where one of the kids utters a line about loneliness and emotional isolation, because that's how children talk, right? Yep, it's one of those movies where the kids talk like little mini adults. Which brings us to the first, most immediate problem, which is that none of the characters in this movie are likeable. Not one of them. Now, I want to make this absolutely positively clear from the outset. I am not blaming the child actors for this. In fact, I would argue that they do a really good job in this movie, playing the roles exactly how they're asked. The problem lies with the writing and the direction. That's what lets them down here. In particular, the character of Smash is very overbearing. As soon as she appears on screen, she's cruel and nasty and comes across as being vindictive. And I understand where that's coming from. She's meant to be angry. She's meant to be acting out because she doesn't like the idea that her parents are not getting back together. And that's a fairly common trait in children's movies, especially those revolving around blended families like this one, but it feels like it's turned up to 11 in virtually every single scene that she appears in. She is always at the most aggressive form that she could possibly be, and that means that the audience immediately takes a dislike to her. It feels like there should be more moments with that character where she lets her guard down a little bit. Maybe she has a little bit of fun. Maybe she actually shares a bit of her anxiety. That does come a little bit later, but it's too late for the audience to really care about her. But she's not the only one. Roz also gets progressively more dislikable as the film goes on. She aspires to be an author, and she too also wants to see her parents get back together. And over the course of the running time, she and Smash actually start to bond over this shared aim, to the extent where it seems rather spiteful, because there is absolutely no evidence that those previous relationships were happy. In fact, far from it. We even see footage on Roz's phone of her birthday party where her dad looks like he barely even wants to be in the same room as his ex. There is palpable tension there, and so you really don't understand what her mindset is. It comes across as being incredibly selfish, and yes, kids can be selfish, but it feels like they spend virtually the entirety of the movie trying to concoct some way of making a wish permanent so they can destroy this new relationship. What is meant to be a light-hearted, magical adventure mostly has them moaning about how much they hate this new relationship, how much they hate their new siblings. It immediately puts the movie on a bad footing, and it really feels like there should be an arc here where they come to the realization about their situation, but it's badly executed. Even up until the very final moments of the film, Roz is still doggedly determined to try and destroy this new coupling, well after everyone else is happy with it, and so it feels like she's learned nothing over the course of the adventure, and it feels like she only finally twigs it in the last 10 seconds or so of the movie, something that the audience has already worked out right from the beginning. And that's so frustrating, but then again, so are the adult characters in their own way. Matthew Goode and Paula Patton are decent actors, but you would never know it from this movie. Admittedly, a lot of that comes down to the writing. Now, I know that parental characters in children's fiction do tend to be a bit absentee and let their children just run around to their own devices, but it feels like here, it's to the point of abject neglect. Them two are just staring love eyes into each other while the kids are just running around, and they disappear for absolutely hours on end, and there's no attention paid to them whatsoever. At one point, they end up in London with virtually no explanation, and even the day after, they still don't really keep an eye on them. They still don't try and work out what exactly their kids are doing. It's to an absolutely ridiculous extent. It's not funny. It just feels like they're really bad parents. They are terrible at this. But then you've got Matthew Goode's performance. He looks like he's clearly phoning it in. He knows that this is a paycheck job. It's a children's movie. You don't have to try very hard. But Paula Patton, I actually felt sorry for in this movie because she is saddled with the worst bits of comedy business throughout the entirety of it. She has several running gags that only serve to make her look like an idiot. She plays an American expat who is still trying to adjust to a British way of life, and what I mean by that is that she's still driving down the wrong side of the road. Oh yeah, she's gonna kill someone. There's also a bit about how she's such a terrible cook that she burns all the recipes that she's trying to concoct. It feels like they've taken the whole clumsy character thing and pushed it to such an extent where she's dangerously inept. You wonder how she even functions in society, especially in a scene where she recounts how she met her new partner. She ended up hitting him on his bike with her car, and then when he tried to grab insurance details, she thought he was hitting on her. Really? That's the story. It feels like she's too dumb to live, and Patton is really trying to sell any of this, and it just embarrasses her. It really is a rare thing to say that the best adult performance in this movie is given by Russell Brand of all people. Russell Brand's entire character in this movie has been completely created for the film version of this story. He was not in the original book. Obviously, I need some kind of antagonist, so enter Tristan, who is living in this mansion that is adorned with all this hunting and colonialist paraphernalia from all the previous generations of his family, and it feels like Brand is the only one that has any kind of real energy or understanding of what he's meant to be playing, and occasionally does have the odd, seemingly improvised one-liner that does actually manage to crack a smile. That's in spite of the fact that this character makes absolutely no sense when you think about it. Especially the fact that he's trying to get the Samiad because he wants to take advantage of its wishing ability. Well, the main problem with that is, how exactly is there supposed to be any kind of tension or jeopardy if the moment the sun goes down, the wish goes away? Because immediately the consequences are just going to be removed again, and we're going to be right back to where we started. The movie never finds a way of getting around this problem. It's one of the numerous plot holes throughout. There's another scene where he somehow ends up on the beach in a massive digger trying to pull up the Samiad, and there's no explanation of how he managed to get a massive digger down onto a beach that the only access to is via a very tiny, narrow tunnel. How did it get down there? I don't know. And that's the kind of sloppy scripting that characterizes the entirety of this movie. Speaking of amusement mostly for older audiences, Michael Caine does elicit a few smiles voicing the Samiad. It's a very odd bit of casting because Caine's voice is immediately recognisable. You know those Cockney tones anywhere, and I can sort of understand the logic behind it because he's meant to be voicing something that's meant to be centuries old. There's meant to be that kind of weariness to him. At the same time though, I would argue that he's too familiar sounding. It's very odd and alien hearing that voice come out of this CG creation, and admittedly, Michael Caine is always going to be Michael Caine, whether he's Harry Brown or a sand fairy that grants wishes. That being said though, Caine always has a certain level of charisma about him, even if it's just his voice as it is here, and it does help that he has some of the best lines of dialogue in the movie to deliver. I will say though, this is a very obvious paycheck job. Obviously he needs to do repairs on the house that Jaws the Revenge built, and he probably recorded this role in maybe an afternoon, but even so, he's still one of the highlights of this movie. I'm not sure if I'm really much of a fan of the design of the Samiad in this movie. Admittedly, it does look better than the one in the 2004 film, which was meant to be a mix of practical effects, but mostly is made up of dodgy CGI work. But I wouldn't say the effects of this new version are all that great either. The Samiad never looks entirely convincing. It always looks like a digital element that stands out from the scenes that it's supposed to be in, and it's not helped by the fact that the design itself, it's meant to look a bit like a monkey with floppy ears. It strays a lot from the original design of the Samiad described in the original Five Children It book. The one in the 2004 film is a lot closer, especially with the snail-like eyes that pop out of it, but I don't think this design really works. I'd imagine they were trying to make it cute and cuddly. It looks a little bit creepy and almost uncanny at times, like they were trying to make it look a bit like Caine at the same time, especially in the moments where he's granting wishes, and he does that by inflating his body and blowing up like a balloon. In those moments, it looks really kind of horrifying at times, to be honest. As for the wishes themselves, that's another element of the movie that feels like a disappointment because you can tell the film has an extremely tight budget, and that really works against the filmmakers when they're meant to be creating a special effects extravaganza. As such, the wishes don't feel entirely realised. Either they stop just as they're getting interesting, or they really don't have the ability to convince the audience. Some of the wishes are fun, especially those they've actually taken from the original source material. A sequence where Smash wishes to be a pop star and they all get whisked away to the O2 for her concert opens up the scope of the movie, and especially considering that they do actually get some crowd work in there. Pop star Cheryl pops up as her agent very briefly in a rather rather cringeworthy cameo, but again, that stops just as it's really starting to take off. But speaking of take off, one of the other sequences in this film is a moment where they wish for flight. That sequence is again maybe slightly better than the one in the 2004 film, and they don't have really egregiously awful CGI wings on the back of them as they fly around, but if you remember the tagline of Superman, "You will believe a man can fly," yeah, you definitely won't believe these kids can fly. This is some of the most ropey, unconvincing green screen work I've seen in quite some time. Perhaps it was a blessing in disguise that this didn't make it to cinema screens, because the effects work in this flying sequence is genuinely embarrassing. Another relatively fun sequence that's taken directly from Wilson's book is a time travel element. They actually go back in time to meet the original kids from 5 Children in It, and that's a great idea that's immediately sidelined in the film version because Roz bumps into one of Tristan's relatives, also played by Russell Brand, who has to be very quickly humiliated when the kids show up with superpowers, which feels weirdly anachronistic considering this is meant to be the early 20th century before superheroes have even been invented. Far too often though, the movie feels flat and lethargic, and a lot of that can be placed directly at the feet of director Andy Diemery, who is well known as a television director, and this is the second film that he's helmed. The previous one that he worked on was 2012's Love Bite, which was an abysmal werewolf comedy that hardly had any werewolves in it. Here, it doesn't feel like he has any sense of pacing to the material, and he doesn't take advantage of the Cornwall setting. Usually, it's quite photogenic, but here, it looks blustery and overcast, and often quite cold. There's no attempt to make it look appealing or appetizing, and it doesn't feel like there's any real conviction in terms of the actual helmsmanship. The movie's also clearly too long. At 105 minutes, that's 10 to 15 minutes longer than it should be, and I think kids' attention spans are going to start wavering towards the end, especially when it very clearly climaxes, and then it drags its feet on the epilogue for a further 10 minutes with a false finish and a second climax that is totally unnecessary and very easily could have been edited out. The film's approach to modernisation is also extremely clumsy. The characters just walk around with their phones in their hands looking for any reception. Have you got any bars? Have you got any bars? These characters are more obsessed with their signal strength than characters in a horror film. Yes, I get it. There's no signal because you're cutting the kids off from the parents because otherwise this premise doesn't really work. I also get the idea this is meant to be a commentary on kids being over-reliant on technology and social media, but it feels very half-formed at best, and all it does is clutter up the movie to a distracting degree, especially from the original intended message, which is, be careful what you wish for. 4 Kids in It is very lackluster. It's poorly scripted, indifferently directed, and doesn't have a lot of charm to it. It reminds me of bad children's movies that I used to grow up watching. It feels like it should have come out about 15 years ago with the same storytelling and effects work to match. It feels instantly dated in that way. As such, the only audience I can really recommend it to is very young children, about 8 or under, because they'll be less discerning about the quality of the CG, and also I think that it might capture their imaginations, but for anyone older than that, I don't think it's going to hold up, and Michael Caine's voice work can only do so much. I think that adults will definitely find this movie isn't for them at all, and really, I would actually say that you should watch 5 Children in It, the 2004 movie, over this. I think that has a lot more going for it, in spite of its very obvious faults, because it's a much better told story in my opinion, or better yet, read the original books. If anything, just wish for something better than this.
4 Kids in It is the very opposite of magical. What should be a light-hearted family adventure has a very cynical, mean-spirited tone, thanks largely to a cast of remarkably unlikable characters, with Matthew Goode and Paula Patton faring particularly badly as the kids' totally inept parents. Jacqueline Wilson's book has been adapted very poorly by Simon Lewis's cat-handed script that largely dispenses with the source material and replaces it with a weak plot involving a new villain played by Russell Brand, who may give the film's best adult performance, but whose presence introduces a slew of plot holes. Andy Diemny's flat direction saps the fun out of the premise and even makes the chorus locations look uninviting, and the special effects sequences are clumsily done. Michael Caine does add some amusement as the voice of the titular It, but he's not enough to save a lackluster film that will disappoint both kids and their parents.
If you like this review, then your wish will be granted over at my Patreon, where you can see my reviews early among other perks, including access to my Discord server. But until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.